Welcome to Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life, with psychologist and author of over 75 books, Dr. Barry Weinhold.
Welcome back, everyone, to Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life with Dr. Barry Weinhold. My name is Ashley Ross. Dr. Weinhold, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How was your week?
It was pretty good. Busy, but all good things. How about yourself?
Yeah, I was a catch-up week. I still had, I was gone the week before, and then I had to catch up a lot this last week. So tell me, how many kids do you have?
2, an 8-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Oh my goodness.
It's quite the interesting dynamic.
Well, the 1-year-old, you will enjoy this segment.
I'm hoping so. I'm looking forward to it. So what are we learning about this week?
Well, it's the effect, a long-term effect of bonding and attachment in the first 9 months of life on the rest of our lives, and including our closest relationships. There's a lot of research out about this, and that I'm really pleased to share some of that. And I think it's really, most of my clients have a disorganized attachment relationship style, and the research confirms that. They said about 8 out of 10 people who have it go into therapy. And so I almost count on it that I'm going to have that. So I start with that kind of premise, and then have to see if it's either confirmed or denied. But basically, the natural learning style of human beings is that everything we experience in our whole life is stored in our body memory. And then if something in our later in life reminds us in some way of that early experience that was not finished, it will come up again and to be dealt with. And so again, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means that and that's the beauty of all this, because do you remember what your life was like when you were 9 months old or 3 months old? I don't.
No.
Although I have recovered a memory when I was 4 months old.
Wow.
And that only was in the last couple of years. So in working with people to help them understand this, you have to almost work backwards. You have to look at what's happening in their relationships and then trace it back to how it could be connected to bonding and attachment issues. And so first of all, there's about 4 different ways that people bond and attach. I use bonding and attachment because some people in the literature talk about bonding, other people talk about attachment. I've decided I'm going to join the literature by talking about both together. So anyway, the goal of attachment, mother-child attachment, is to have a secure bond built between mother and child. And what that does, it creates a inner sense of basic trust for the infant. And if there's any wobble in that process, and sometimes the wobble happens through no fault of the mother or anything. First of all, being a mother of an infant, and you know this, is a 24/7 job. And it's overwhelming at times. And so I think we don't really understand that enough to give mothers the support they need. They need a lot of support. The government needs to support mothers, first of all, by giving them paid maternity leave so they can stay home for at least a year. That's what I would say would be what would be ideal to be full-time mothers. But most mothers have to go back to work, and they turn their babies over to childcare at about 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks on the average. That's about how long they can stand to be off job and not get paid before they start to suffer. So that, to me, is one of the biggest problems in our society. And as a result, the research shows that only about half of infants in this country leave infancy with a secure bonding and attachment. So what happens to the others? Well, there's 3 insecure styles or relationship styles out of the 4 different kinds. And the first one is what is called the avoidance style. And these are adults who have trouble being close to others. They have a lot of walls and barriers about intimacy. So they have trouble. I wrote a whole book about this called The Flight from Intimacy, and how people with that style tend to have trouble with being close to anyone else in their life as adults. And the second insecure attachment and bonding and attachment style is called an anxious and ambivalent style. And this is very common in relationships too. It's the approach avoidance in relationship. I want to be close to you, but when I get close to you, then I want to move away. You know what I'm talking about. You're smiling.
That also sounds familiar.
It sounds familiar, yeah. Yeah, and that's a common one. And it can drive people crazy in relationship. They have intimacy one moment, and then the next minute the other person is doing something to distance themselves. And so that pattern can really affect relationships. Also, obviously, the first one is devastating to relationships. And then the third one, which is the most recent one that was discovered, is called the disorganized attachment. And they've developed a research protocol to observe infants in a room with their mother, and then they introduce a stranger into the room, and they watch how the infant responds to the stranger. And then, depending on how they respond, they either have a secure attachment, they have one of the 3 insecure. And in the disorganized attachment, in the avoidant, the child will go and try to cling to the mother. They're afraid of the stranger. And in the anxious and ambivalent, they'll approach, but then pull away, approach, pull away. And in the disorganized, they will try to do bizarre things to gain the attention of the stranger. They will, if they're able to, they'll run in circles, or they may pound their head on the floor, or just scream uncontrollably. And so they call this the disorganized, because basically they feel when that happens, the internal structure of the child is disorganized. It's not organized and able to handle the situation effectively. And so they do bizarre things to try to display what they're feeling inside. And so what they did in one research, well, it was actually a major research study. They took the people they had observed when they were like 6 months old, and they talked to them again when they were 19 years old. And guess what? The same patterns were there.
That's crazy.
In their adult form.
Yeah, sure.
And so they concluded that unless some intervention occurs, this forms a template for the rest of our lives. The first 9 months of our life forms the template about how we're going to live the rest of our lives, unless we become aware of it, or some intervention like therapy, or you name your demons and tame them. That is what will go on, and that's will show up in your adult relationships. So that's the bad news. Of course, the other bad news.
What's the good news?
The other bad news is that good news. These patterns often don't show up early in relationship. The relationship has to be close enough and safe enough for them to show up, and then they show up. And so it basically is a way of, and very commonly, the disorganized attachment is that at some point, the child realizes that the parent is either incapable or unable, for whatever reason, to meet the child's needs. That they're too busy, too distracted, too whatever. And so the child then starts to meet the parent's needs. And they become mama's little helper or daddy's little girl. And they give up their own needs to try to see if they can help the parents do a better job of meeting their needs. Hopefully that will then come back to them and they will then be better able to meet the child's needs. That never happens though, unfortunately. And then that leads always often to some ultimate resentment that I'm doing all this thing for you and you're not doing enough for me. Do you see how that shows up in relationship?
Almost definitely. I can identify several ways that that's appeared in my life, and as a parent, but then also as a spouse too.
Yeah. So it means that there are patterns of behavior, and these are intergenerational, because likely if you came out of infancy with a detached or a disorganized attachment, your mother also probably had a disorganized attachment, and her mother had, and so on. And so it's an intergenerational pattern. And I don't blame mothers. I think that being a mother of a newborn is probably the hardest job in the world. And as I said before, we just don't give mothers and families the support they need. I felt I didn't get that support growing up and I was aware of it. So I tried to do something about it. I helped create a home visitation program for new parents in my area called The First Visitor. And so people at the hospital are given information about this program. And if they sign up, they are assigned a visitor. Often it's a nurse or another trained person, can be just a volunteer who's had raised their own kids and now wants to give back. And that person is assigned to visit the family on a regular basis, starting with the first week they're home. And we also arranged for the local Mormon church, the ladies of the church, to make baby blankets. So when the first visitor came, they came with a gift for the baby. And the research on that is that in families where there's a home visitor, there's no childhood neglect or abuse. That is headed off by the lack of often giving information to parents about how to be, because some of the abuse and neglect that parents administer to their children is either out of their own fatigue or their own ignorance. And so I'm really proud of that program. It's still in operation today. And we've served thousands and thousands of new parents. It's targeted to new parents because we think that's the most vulnerable parent, the first-time parent, and needs the most support. And they can also, the home visitor can help them access community resources they may not know about, even provide respite care. They can babysit for a couple of hours while mom takes a nap, which is really very helpful sometimes. And so that's one thing that, besides paid maternity leave and home visitation, almost all the first world countries in the world have free home visitation services available. We don't. We have it available in certain parts of like in Colorado, there's been a lot of initiative because the governor's wife was a social worker and she initiated a statewide program of home visitation. So every new parent in Colorado has access to a home visitor. And that's unusual. That does not happen in most states. So anyway, the effect of it is long-term. That's the biggest thing to pay attention to. And these patterns are so subtle. Obviously, they happened at times when we didn't even remember what was going on. And so it's often necessary to understand what the symptoms are. And so I've developed a self-quiz that helps people define what might be symptoms of it. And scroll down a little bit. Yeah, there's the inventory, your name, your date, and it has the symptoms of disorganized attachment in an adult form. And then we have to then extrapolate. If an adult is exhibiting these symptoms, that must mean that that's where it developed in infancy and carried on throughout childhood and adolescence to when they became when they married and became parents themselves. So scroll down. There's a lot. There's on this. Just scroll down if you can. I won't read too many of these, but you can get the idea. Again, that's repeated the basic tasks of the early exploration period of development. So we ask people to put a number by each one from 1 to 4, and then when I work with people, I look at the ones that they marked a 3 or a 4, because if you look at the scale at the beginning, a 3 meant usually, or most of the time, and then 4 means usually. So it's usually true as 3, and most of the time is 4. There's not much difference between usually true and most of the time. So anything is a 3 or a 4, I look at that as a significant evidence of disorganized attachment. And then at the end, there's a scale to determine how serious it might be. There it is. Moderate. Actually, the last one, over 100, is now not showing up there. Well, I don't know where it got to, but there it is. It's at the very end. Strong evidence of disorganized attachment style. So that kind of is a first step, is seeing if you can, again, if you can name it, you can tame it. So if you can see that, yes, I have some of these symptoms, and they show up in my relationship, and they affect how intimate and how authentic my relationship is. Because typically what happens is that people with this style have certain characteristics. And I actually put together a list of characteristics that might help people understand it even more. So there's a chart I have. You can put that up on the screen. And there it is. Characteristics of people who have a disorganized attachment. Here are some of the characteristics. Childhood history of physical abuse, trauma, or emotional abuse, neglect, and rejection. History of pushing people away when they get close in intimate relationships. Under stress, get confused and dissociate to cope with conflicting inner signals. Had a mother or father who had a disorganized style. Had a depressed mother who could not offer consistent care. And then in number 6, the coping mechanisms. This is kind of interesting because there are 3 different kinds of coping mechanisms that people with this style engage in. The first one is they become solicitous caregivers to their partners in their relationship. And they're constantly doing more than their partner even asks for. And this often leads to burnout, of course, in a relationship. If they continue to do more of meeting their partner's needs than they do meeting their own needs. And then the second one is that you have sometimes people who've learned how to, where is it on there? Oh, did it get, oh yeah, little general. The little general is the people who start to organize the life of others. And they become in charge of everything, that all the decisions, they pay the bills, they cook the meals, they do the laundry, they do, everything, and take control of the life of the couple. And that's what's called being the little general. And then the last one, which often doesn't happen in a lot of relationships, but it's possible because these people don't form relationships. The loner who, because of what was happening growing up, withdrew into themselves and became a loner. If you remember the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, he was a classic loner. And he obviously carried out some nefarious acts as a loner, but most of it came out of a disorganized attachment, which occurred due to a serious bonding break when he was about, I think it was maybe a couple months old. He developed hives and was sent to the hospital for a week. And his mother had no contact with him during that time. And she says when Teddy came back from the hospital, he was a different baby. That shock of that total cutoff from any bonding is like, it's called a bonding break. And sometimes people with a disorganized attachment have suffered bonding breaks. Now, sometimes it's something you couldn't control. Mother gets sick and has to go to the hospital, or the baby gets sick and has to go to the hospital. Although it's often very important that baby and mother still maintain contact as much as possible if that happens. Then the other thing that happens often is, in another inventory, I talk about how did you feel like your parents' careers were more important than you were? That's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
You want to say anything about that one?
That one's tough. I battle with that one a lot, almost my whole life. So one of the things I'm currently pursuing is trying to understand work-life harmony and what that means to be a professional in the world and have a thing that I do for a living, but then also how does that affect my home life, and how does that affect how my children feel about our relationship and the time that we get to spend together. It's definitely a struggle.
What happens to children when that happens is they often feel less than, and it really affects their self-esteem. I was not important enough for my mother or my father to pay attention to me while I was growing up.
Yep.
I have a number of clients who are working with that, struggling with that right now. And it's really a shame. But again, parents are doing the best they know how,
right,
given the resources they have. And unfortunately, in our country, they're not given very many resources.
No.
I lived in a country where mothers and families were given lots of resources. I lived in Czechoslovakia working on a project for the UN, and the Czechoslovakian government gave mothers 3 years of paid maternity leave.
Wow.
And their job was held for them during that time. They weren't
so
paid 100%. They were paid like 87, 75, 70 over 3 years. And interestingly, most of the couples, their children are at least 3 years apart because they didn't get pregnant during that time they were home.
Right. Interesting.
And that's a good spacing of children for giving each child enough, mom time or dad time without having to share it with anyone else. And so we just are so behind the rest of the world when it comes to this. And it's probably the most important thing we could do for anyone who's a citizen of our country, to give them a foundation, give them a solid foundation, allow them to have secure bounding, and that forms a template that allows them to trust others and trust themselves. I think a lot of the mistrust of the government right now is disorganized attachment. It's an after effect, because that lack of trust of self can really expand to mistrust of everything, including the government, your employer, what you see on TV, whatever. Now, there's some kind of important kind of discernment that people ask questions about things, but a lack of trust and to develop kind of conspiracy theories about people who are doing some nefarious things to us when none of that's true is an example of a lack of trust in others and the government. And I mean, they talk about the secret government or the dark state as being the enemies of us, and nobody can ever define what that is, but we are so afraid that somehow there's a nefarious force that's keeping us from being who we want to be. So it really has a lot of long-term effects. How do you fix this? Well, it isn't necessarily that difficult once you begin to understand it. Again, if you can name it, you can tame it. So once you understand that this is what's happening, and then you can begin to consciously catch yourself when you fall into that pattern and pull yourself out of it. Some people, of course, need some therapy to help them go through that. And that's a good way to, but also using your relationship to talk about this and how it's happening in your relationship with your partner, and noticing whatever conflicts that are showing up related to this imbalance. So it's really a matter of consciousness, and again, raising your psyche and your psychological intelligence to understand that something as early as the first 9 months of our lives can affect the rest of our lives, and does and will, unless there's some intervention in our part, some consciousness is brought to that process to make it necessary to change it. And I have a disorganized attachment. I know that, but I'm conscious of that, and I'm aware of when I fall into it, and can pull myself out of it. And that's about all I can do, is just know that and change the things that I know I can change about it. So this was a rather dark month of talking about inner demons, first about conflict, and then about betrayal, and then about shame, and now about disorganized attachment. But these are really, I think, the things that keep people from having the kind of authentic relationships they want. They don't know why they're upset in their conflicts, and they don't know how to resolve them. They don't know how to handle betrayal. They don't know how to handle shame, and they don't know how to handle disorganized attachment styles as it shows up. So hopefully the information I'm giving this month will help couples have some hopefully meaningful conversations with each other on these topics, and find ways to keep them from interfering with their desire to become more authentic as a couple.
I think that's very, very possible. There was so much steps along the way, and lots of resources, especially the quizzes and everything, just to create some beginning steps to working towards that. And I'm excited to kind of, hopefully I can dive into these myself.
Well, next month, when I talk about the family, I'm going to talk about what it takes to raise an authentic adult, what parents need to do. So I will be giving specific from the research that I've read, and also some of the research I've done about what parents need to do to create authentic adults.
I'm really looking forward to that one. I think it's a big problem, and something that a lot of parents could use a lot of help with, and don't know where to start.
Where would parents learn this?
There's no school for parents. So.
There's no school. It's the last vestige of amateurism in our culture.
Yes.
So, anyway.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Weinhold.
You're welcome. Good working with you this month, Ashley.
Thank you. You as well.
Look forward to next month.
I feel the same way. And a reminder for everyone, all the self-quizzes and guides that Dr. Weinhold has referenced can be downloaded at the link in the show notes for today's podcast and any of the podcasts previously in this month. And until then, we look forward to hearing from you in November. We'll talk soon, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye. See you next week.
Sounds great.
For more information, please visit the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership at CICRCL.org, or click the link in the show notes.